The year was 1887, and the air in Montana tasted of iron and ice. Honora felt the train shudder to a halt, a long, metallic sigh that seemed to echo the exhaustion in her own bones. For 3 days, she had been rattled in the hard-backed seat of the passenger car, breathing coal smoke and the stink of unwashed bodies, her stomach clinging to her spine. She pulled the thin, threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, a useless gesture against the cold that seeped through the very walls of the train. She was 23 years old, though she felt 100, and possessed nothing in the world but the clothes she wore and a single, battered carpetbag at her feet. Inside it was one change of linen, a bar of lye soap, and the letters. The letters were from Mr. Harold Linton. He was, by his own account, a man of 50 years, a widower with a prosperous ranch who sought a wife to manage his household and provide decent companionship in his middle years. Her uncle, eager to be rid of the family's lingering scandal, had arranged the correspondence. Honora, destitute and desperate, had agreed to everything. She had painted herself as a woman of simple virtues and domestic skill, and she had prayed he would not look too closely at the hollows in her cheeks or the shadows in her eyes. She stepped down from the car onto the frozen plank platform. The town, if one could call it that, was little more than a muddy street slicing through the endless, wind-scoured plain. A few raw lumber buildings faced each other in defiance of the vast gray sky, a general store, a saloon, a livery, and the station. A man was waiting. He was older, as his letters had promised, with a thick gray beard and a fine wool coat that spoke of his prosperity. But the face above the beard was not the kind, paternal one she had conjured in her mind. It was a face of cold stone. "Mr. Linton?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. He did not step forward to take her bag. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the cheap, worn fabric of her dress, the smudge of soot on her jaw. "So," he boomed, his voice loud enough for the station agent and 2 rough-looking men by the saloon doors to hear, "You are Honora." "Yes, sir, I am." She tried to curtsy, a clumsy city gesture that felt foolish on this raw frontier. "You are a liar, madam." The words struck her like a physical blow. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. "Sir, I do not understand." "You do not understand," he mimicked, his face darkening to a mottled purple. "You presented yourself as a decent woman, a God-fearing woman." "I am," she whispered, her throat closing. "You are not." He took a step closer, and she flinched. "A telegram, madam. It arrived 2 days ago. From your own uncle. A warning, a confession of your history." Honora's blood turned to ice. Her uncle. Of course. He had sold her, and then, to salve his own conscience, he had ensured her ruin was complete. "He wrote to you?" "He wrote to warn me that I was about to take soiled goods into my home," Harold Linton shouted. The men by the saloon had stopped talking. They were watching openly now. "That you were cast out from your home in the East for sins of the flesh. Whether you bore a bastard, dead or alive, it does not matter." "It was not," she began, the old, useless defense rising in her throat. "I was—" "Silence." A woman, as gray and hard as Linton himself, swept out of the general store, her arms full of parcels. She had the same stony eyes, the same rigid spine. "Harold, is this the one?" "This is the one. Agnes," Linton said, gesturing to Honora as if she were a diseased animal. The woman, his sister. Agnes dropped her parcels on a bench and marched up to Honora. She looked at her with disgust so pure it was almost fascinating. "A harlot. You came all this way to bring your shame to a decent man's house? Did you think we were fools out here? Did you think we would not smell the sin on you?" "Please," Honora begged, her words torn away by the wind. "I have nowhere else to go. The letters. We made an agreement." "The agreement was based on a lie," Harold snapped. "You are damaged goods. Girl, I'll not have you. My household is a respectable one. I will not have my name whispered in connection with filth like you." "But I have no money," Honora said, the raw panic finally breaking through her shock. "I have nothing. You cannot just leave me here." "I can," Linton said, his voice flat and final. "And I will. You are not my concern. You never were." "What she is," Agnes said, her voice a sharp crackle, "is a lesson to other wayward women. Go back to the gutter you crawled from." Harold Linton turned his back on her. He and his sister gathered their parcels, climbed into a sturdy wagon, and, without a backward glance, drove away. The rattling of the wagon wheels was the only sound, and then it, too, was swallowed by the relentless, whining wind. Honora stood frozen on the platform. The station agent busied himself with a crate, his shoulders tight, refusing to meet her eye. The men at the saloon muttered something, and one of them laughed. She was alone, more alone than she had ever been in her life. She picked up her single bag and walked, her legs wooden, toward the center of the muddy street. The wind was a living thing, a predator that clawed at her thin clothes and numbed her face in seconds. The sky was low and oppressive, the color of old pewter. It promised snow, and it promised it soon. She tried the hotel first. It was a 2-story building with a sign that read, "The Pioneer." The man behind the desk was reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered, his eyes immediately cataloging her worn dress and desperate expression. "A room, please," she said, her coins from the journey clutched in her hand. "We're full," he said, not looking away from his paper. "But there is no one else here." "Full," he repeated, his voice harder. "No rooms for your kind." She flinched. "My kind?" "Heard what, mister?" Linton said. "We don't abide troubles of that sort in this town. Bad for business." She was cast out. The word was a brand, invisible and burning, on her forehead. She tried the general store, thinking perhaps she could buy passage back to anywhere. The woman behind the counter, who had been watching the scene at the platform from her window, simply shook her head. "Got nothing for you." Honora could feel the gossip spreading like a stain. Eyes watched her from behind lace curtains. Men whispered as she passed the saloon, their voices low and speculative. She was no longer a person. She was a story. A scandal. The cold was becoming unbearable. Her hands were numb, her feet blocks of ice inside her thin, cracked boots. There was nowhere to go. The vast, empty plain stretched out in every direction, a white, frozen sea of nothing. She stumbled, her ankle turning in the frozen mud, and caught herself against the rough-hewn wall of the livery stable, the smell of hay and horse manure, warm and alive. Drifted out. It was a shelter. It was the only shelter that would have her. Honora pushed the heavy door open and slipped inside. The warmth was immediate, a dim, animal heat that made her skin ache. Horses stamped in their stalls, their breath pluming in the air. A lantern hung from a central beam, casting long, dancing shadows. She found an empty stall in the back, one filled with clean straw, and she collapsed into it. The shame, the fear, and the profound, bone-deep exhaustion finally broke her. She buried her face in the rough straw and wept. They were not the hot, relieving tears of sadness, but the dry, racking sobs of absolute despair. She had fought so hard, survived so much, the seduction, the abandonment, the secret pregnancy, the horrifying, silent birth of a child who never drew breath, the rejection by her own family. She had endured it all, believing that this was her one chance, and it was gone. There was nothing left. She did not know how long she cried, only that the sobs eventually hollowed her out, leaving her empty and shivering. "That's a hard sound for a man to hear." The voice came from the shadows. It was deep, gravelly, and held no trace of pity. Honora sprang up, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood in the center aisle of the stable, outlined against the open doorway. He was tall, taller than any man she had ever seen, and broad. He wore a heavy, dark coat and a flat-brimmed black hat, the shadow of which obscured his features. He had been there, buying a horse from the stablemaster, and had been standing in the shadows, watching her. For how long she did not know. He took a step forward, into the weak pool of a lantern light, and she stifled a gasp. His face was hard, angular, and cut by a long, pale scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jawline. It was a brutal mark, one that spoke of violence and survival. He looked at her not with the leering interest of the saloon men or the righteous disgust of Harold Linton, but with a flat, appraising stare, as if she were a horse he was considering buying, checking her teeth and her fetlocks. "Please," she whispered, wiping her face with a numb hand. I was just getting out of the wind. I will go." He did not move. He just watched her. There was something in his eyes, something beyond the coldness. It was not kind. It was recognition. He was looking at her, and she felt the horrifying certainty that he saw her, saw all the way down to the broken, desperate thing she had become. He knew this feeling. He lived with it. That recognition, that shared knowledge of the abyss, broke the last of her pride. He was her last chance, a terrible, dangerous, scarred chance, but the only one left. She stumbled out of the stall, her legs shaking so hard she had to grip the wooden rail. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. He smelled of cold air, leather, and whiskey. "Please," she said again, her voice low and raw. "I heard what that man said. I know what you think of me. I do not care. I have nothing. They will not sell me a room. They will not sell me a ticket. The snow is coming. I will die out there." He remained silent. His stillness was a physical weight, pressing against her. She took the final, terrible step. She reached out and grabbed the sleeve of his heavy coat. The fabric was rough, damp with melted snow. "I am begging you," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "I will be your servant. I will be your whore. I will be whatever you want. Do whatever you want to me." She looked up, forcing her eyes to meet his, to show him she meant it, to show him she had nothing left to lose. "Use me or brand me," she begged, the words tearing from her throat, raw and ugly. "But don't leave me here." Weston Cade looked down at the small, shaking woman clutching his arm. He saw the desperation in her eyes, a mirror of a pain he knew too well, a pain he had carried since the war, since the fire. He saw the raw, exposed nerve of survival. He did not speak. He did not move to comfort her. He simply reached into his pocket, his gaze never leaving hers, and pulled out a small leather pouch. He loosened the drawstring and poured a few heavy silver dollars into his gloved palm. He pressed the coins, cold and hard, into her hand, closing her fingers around them. Then, he gently but firmly detached her hand from his sleeve, turned, and walked out of the livery, leaving her alone in the shadows and the straw. The money was an anchor. It was also a final, crushing rejection. It was a payment for services not rendered, a dismissal. Honora looked at the silver in her palm, and a new, colder despair settled over her. He had not helped her. He had paid her to stop begging. She dropped the coins into the straw. She would not take his charity. She would not be a paid-for problem. She grabbed her single bag, her movement stiff and automatic. She would not die in this stable, like an animal. She would walk. She did not know where, but she would walk. She pushed open the door and stepped out into the twilight. The wind had picked up, and the snow had begun, not as gentle flakes, but as a hard, driving sleet that stung her face and blinded her. The town was already shuttering itself, yellow squares of light appearing in windows, warm and mocking. She put her back to the town and started walking down the wagon-rutted road that led out onto the plains. She had no destination. She just walked. The cold was a shock, and then it was a presence, and then it was all there was. It seeped through her clothes, through her skin, into her very marrow. The world dissolved into a howling whiteness. There was no road, no sky, only the driving snow and the burning in her lungs. Her feet became 2 blocks of wood, and she could no longer feel her hands. She thought, vaguely, that this was a terrible, lonely way to die. She thought of the child she had lost, the small, blue-faced girl who had never cried. Perhaps she would see her now. She stumbled over something, a frozen rock, a root, and fell hard. The snow was soft, like a feather bed. It was so tempting to just rest, to close her eyes for just a minute. The pain was fading, replaced by a floating, peaceful numbness. She let her bag fall from her frozen fingers and curled into herself, the snow quickly covering her. She was so very tired. She did not hear the wagon, or the jingle of harness, or the heavy crunch of boots in the snow. She did not feel the strong arms that lifted her, as if she weighed nothing. Weston Cade looked down at the half-frozen woman in his arms. He had ridden out of town, but the sight of her, the raw, animal plea in her voice, had stuck in his gut. He had known she would not take the money. He had known the town would not help her. And he had known, with a certainty that chilled him, that she would do exactly this. She was too proud and too broken to do anything else. He swore, a low, harsh sound, at his own weakness. He had not involved himself in another human being's problems in 10 years. He did not believe in salvation. He did not believe in mercy. But he had seen her face in the livery, and he had seen a ghost. He carried her to his wagon, laying her in the back and covering her with 3 heavy wool blankets and a buffalo robe. He did not try to revive her. He simply turned the wagon around, away from the town, away from the settled valley, and drove into the heart of the growing storm, toward the remote, lonely ranch that bore his name. When Honora woke, the first thing she felt was pain, a dull, aching, thawing pain in her hands and feet that made her want to scream. The second thing she felt was warmth, a deep, penetrating warmth that came from a roaring fire in a stone hearth nearby. She was in bed, a real bed, with clean, coarse sheets and heavy wool blankets. She opened her eyes. The room was simple, almost monastic. The walls were bare, scrubbed clean pine. There was a simple wooden dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and the single chair she was sitting in. No, the chair was by the fire. She was in bed. A woman was sitting in the chair, mending a pair of men's heavy trousers. She was broad, with a face as weathered and kind as a baked apple, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked up when Honora stirred. "Well," the woman said, her voice surprisingly soft. "The dead return. Thought you were a goner for sure. Mr. Cade brought you in like a sack of frozen laundry." Where am I?" Honora's voice was a croak. "You're at the Cade Ranch, safest, loneliest place in this whole territory. I'm Maisie. I cook." She put down her sewing. "You're lucky. Another hour out there, and you'd have lost fingers. Maybe more." Maisie stood and came over with a tin cup of something that steamed. "Drink this. It's broth, and don't talk." Honora drank. The broth was hot, salty, and life-giving. It burned a path down to her stomach and spread warmth through her limbs. Mr. Cade," Honora whispered, ignoring the order. "He brought me here?" Maisie nodded, her expression unreadable. "He did." "Why?" Maisie let out a short, dry laugh. "Girl, if you're looking for reasons in anything Weston Cade does, you'll be looking for a long time. He's a man who keeps his own counsel. Has for as long as I've known him." She took the empty cup from Honora's shaking hands. "You rest, but I'll give you one piece of advice. And you'd be smart to take it. Be grateful for the roof. Be grateful for the food. But don't go getting any ideas." "Ideas?" "About him," Maisie said, her voice dropping, though there was no one else to hear. "He's not a kind man. He's not a friend. He's a shadow. He gave you a place to heal. He won't give you anything else. Don't mistake this for softness. He'll let you stay till the storm passes and you're fit. But don't you get too close to him. That fire in him, it doesn't warm. It just burns. You understand me?" Honora, remembering the cold, dead eyes in the livery, the brutal scar, and the silence, nodded. She understood perfectly. "Good," Maisie said, patting her shoulder. "You get some sleep. The snow's piling up. Looks like none of us are going anywhere for a while." Maisie left, closing the door softly behind her. Honora lay back against the pillows, her body aching, her mind a whirl. She was alive. She was warm. She was in the house of the scarred man who had refused her, only to save her. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the snow, thick and white and final, piled up against the windows, burying the cabin, burying the world, leaving only the silence of the house and the tension-filled void between her and its master. The snow did not stop for 3 days. It buried the fences and drifted high against the rough-hewn logs of the ranch house, turning the world into a landscape of blinding white silence. Inside, Honora recovered her strength not with the idle rest of a guest, but with the grim determination of a woman paying a debt. As soon as the frost left her limbs and the fever of exposure receded, she rose from the warm bed in the guest room. She found Maisie in the kitchen, a room that smelled of sourdough and wood smoke, and asked for work. When Maisie tried to protest, claiming the master had given no such orders, Honora simply picked up a heavy cast-iron skillet and began to scour it. She had no money, and she had no pride left to barter, but she had her hands. She scrubbed the pine floors until her knuckles were red and raw. She peeled mountains of potatoes, her knife moving with a rhythmic, hypnotic precision. She hauled firewood from the porch, ignoring the bite of the wind that managed to slice through her thin shawl. She worked until her back ached, a dull throb that distracted her from the hollow space in her chest where her heart used to be. Weston Cade was a ghost in his own house. He spent his days out in the storm, tending to the cattle that huddled in the draws and the horses in the barn, returning only when the light failed. He would stomp the snow from his boots on the porch, a heavy, rhythmic sound that made Honora's pulse jump, and enter the house bringing the smell of cold air and wet wool with him. He rarely spoke to her. He ate his meals at the head of the long wooden table, his eyes fixed on his plate or in the darkness beyond the window. But Honora felt his gaze. It was heavy and tangible, touching her when her back was turned. He watched her as she knelt to stoke the fire. He watched her as she carried water. He watched her not with desire, but with a brooding, calculated assessment, as if he were waiting for her to break, to steal, or to flee. She did none of those things. She simply worked. The tension between them was a taut wire, vibrating in the silence of the long winter evenings. It was not the tension of hatred, but the wariness of two injured animals circling each other in a cage. One night, the wind rose to a scream, rattling the window panes in their frames. Maisie had retired to her small room off the kitchen, leaving Honora to finish banking the fire in the main hearth. The house felt vast and empty, the shadows stretching long and distorted across the floor. Honora heard a sound from the study, a room Weston rarely opened. It was the clink of glass against glass. She hesitated, the fire poker heavy in her hand, then moved toward the slightly ajar door. The light from the hallway spilled inside, revealing Weston slumped in a leather chair. A bottle of whiskey stood open on the desk beside him, half empty. He had removed his heavy coat and his flannel shirt hung open, unbuttoned to his waist. He was staring at his own chest. Honora froze. Across his ribs and sternum, the skin was puckered and twisted, a map of shiny, violent scar tissue that looked like melted wax. It was a burn, old but extensive, a mark of fire that had nearly consumed him. He looked up, his eyes glassy and dark, sensing her presence before he saw her. He did not cover himself. He did not shout. He simply looked at her, the defenses he usually wore stripped away by the whiskey and the storm. "Looking for something to steal?" he asked, his voice a rough slide of gravel. "No," Honora said, stepping into the room. She did not look away from the scar. "I was banking on the fire. I heard a noise. Just the wind," he muttered, taking a drink straight from the bottle. He winced as the liquor hit his throat. "And the ghosts. They are loud tonight." Honora took a step closer. The heat coming off the iron stove in the corner was stifling, but Weston shivered. "That mark," she said softly, gesturing to his chest. "It looks painful." Weston laughed, a sound void of humor. He ran a hand over the twisted skin. "It is old, 1864, the war, but this—" He tapped the center of the scar. This was not the war. This was after. When I came back. He looked at her, his gaze piercing. You think I am a monster. Do you not? The whole valley does. Cade, the recluse. Cade, the killer. I do not think you are a monster, Honora said. I think you are a man who is hurting. He sneered, but the expression lacked force. My brother and I built this place. We survived the cannons and the dysentery and the long march home. We thought the war was hell. We were wrong. Hell was waiting right here. He took another drink. Greedy men wanted this valley. They wanted the water rights. They set the fire while we slept. My brother did not make it out. I pulled him from the ashes, but he was already gone. The fire took him, and it branded me. He leaned forward, the firelight casting deep hollows in his face. I have not believed in anything good since that day. Love, family, mercy. They are lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. In the end, fire takes it all. Honora stood silent, the weight of his confession pressing down on her. She understood that void. She understood the sensation of looking at the world and seeing only a trap. I know, she whispered. Weston looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes narrowing. What do you know about it? A girl from the East with soft hands. My hands are not soft anymore, she said, holding them up. They were red, chapped, and rough from the lye soap. And I know because I was burned too. Not with fire. She walked to the window, staring out at the swirling snow. His name was Julian. He was the son of a banker. He had golden hair and he read poetry, and he told me I was the only true thing in a world of pretenses. Her voice was flat, reciting a history she had gone over 1,000 times in the dark. I believed him. I let him into my heart and into my bed, and when I told him I was with child, he laughed. He said he was engaged to a woman of his own station. He gave me $50 and told me to get rid of it. She turned back to Weston. He was watching her intently, the bottle forgotten in his hand. I kept the child, she said, her voice trembling for the first time. A little girl. She was born silent. She never cried, not once. My uncle found out and put me on a train before I had even stopped bleeding. He said I was a stain, that I had killed my mother with shame from beyond the grave. She took a breath, steadying herself. So I know. Weston, I know that love is a weapon men use to break you. I know that family is a contract that can be voided. And I know that we are all just waiting for the next fire. Weston stared at her. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the heavy, suffocating weight of their shared damage. They were two ruins, standing amidst the wreckage of their lives, recognizing the same architecture of destruction in each other. He did not offer her pity. She was grateful for that. Pity would have destroyed her. Instead, he poured a splash of whiskey into a second glass and pushed it across the desk toward her. To the fire, he said. Honora took the glass. The amber liquid burned, but it warmed the cold place in her stomach. To the fire. They drank in silence, the storm raging outside. Two soldiers in a war that no one else could see. The days that followed held a different quality. The silence remained, but the tension had shifted. It was less like the calm before an attack and more like the quiet of a church. They moved around each other with a new awareness. Honora continued her work, but now Weston did not just watch, he sometimes intervened. He would silently take the heavy bucket of water from her hand and carry it to the kitchen. He would leave the best cut of meat on her plate. They did not speak of the night in the study, but it hung between them, a secret pact. One evening, a week later, they sat in the main room. The blizzard had finally broken, leaving the world scoured and brilliant under a cold moon. Weston sat in his leather chair, a pipe clamped between his teeth. He struck a match, but it flared and died before he could light the tobacco. He struck another, and his hand, usually so steady, shook slightly. The cold had gotten into his joints. Without thinking, Honora reached out. She took the box of matches from the table, struck one against the rough strip on the side, and cupped her hand to protect the flame as she reached toward his face. The moment her hand came near him, Weston moved. It was a blur of motion, instinct honed by years of violence. His hand shot out and clamped around her wrist, halting her movement. His grip was iron hard, crushing the delicate bones. Honora froze. Her breath hitched in her throat, her eyes going wide. Her body remembered a different grip, a different anger, and she shrank back, flinching as if expecting a blow. The match burned down, singing her fingertips before she dropped it. Weston saw the flinch. He saw the terror that flashed in her eyes, the way she made herself small, waiting for pain. It was a reaction he had seen in horses that had been beaten, and in men who had been broken in prison camps. He released her wrist instantly, as if her skin had burned him. Honora stumbled back a step, clutching her wrist to her chest, her breathing shallow. Weston remained seated, but his face was pale. He looked at his own hand, the hand that had hurt her, and then up at her face. The realization washed over him, dark and sickly. She had not just been abandoned. She had been hurt. The man, the uncle, the world, someone had taught her to fear a sudden movement. He started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. I did not mean to startle you. Honora nodded, still rubbing her wrist. I know. I should have asked. No. Weston stood up. He loomed over her, large and dark, but he kept his hands carefully at his sides. You do not need to ask to show kindness in this house, but you must understand, I am not a tame animal, Honora, and neither are you. He stepped closer, until he could smell the soap on her skin and the faint scent of wood smoke in her hair. You are safe here, he said, his voice low and intense, a vow carved in stone. No one will raise a hand to you within these walls, not ever again. He paused, his eyes searching hers. But do not mistake that for love. I have nothing left to give a woman. I am burnt out, hollow. Honora looked up at him. The fear was fading, replaced by that same fierce honesty that had made her beg him in the livery stable. She saw the walls he built, the scars he wore like armor. I am not looking for love, Weston, she said clearly. I am done with love. It costs too much. She lowered her hand from her wrist. I am looking for somewhere I can breathe. That is all. Weston held her gaze for a long moment. Then breathe, he said. Breathe. He turned and walked out into the night, leaving her standing by the dying fire, her wrist still throbbing, her heart beating a strange, erratic rhythm. The winter began to loosen its grip. The snowdrift slumped, heavy and wet, and the wind lost its razor edge. Honora found a rhythm in the ranch life. She learned to bake bread that rose high and light. She learned to churn butter. She began to feel, for the first time in years, that she had a place. But the world outside the ranch was not so content to let them be. Every Sunday, Maisie took the buckboard wagon into town for supplies. When she returned, her face was often tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. Honora knew what it meant. The town was talking. The scandal of the mail-order bride who had been rejected by the respectable Harold Linton only to be taken in by the devil of the valley. Weston Cade was too delicious to ignore. They called her a fallen woman, a concubine, a witch who had ensnared a monster. The rumors festered, fed by the jealousy of other ranchers who had long coveted Cade's prime grazing land. One evening, Honora brought a fresh pot of coffee to the hearth where Weston was mending a bridle. The firelight played over his features, softening the harsh lines of his face. He looked up as she approached, and, for a moment, his guard was down. She poured the coffee, the steam rising between them. As she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed. The contact was electric, a sudden spark that made the air in the room go thin. Honora did not pull away. She stood close to him, drawn by a gravity she could not name. Weston looked at her, his eyes traveling from her hands to her mouth. He leaned in, just an inch, the intent clear in the darkening of his gaze. Honora's breath caught. She wanted him to close the distance. She wanted to feel something other than cold and duty. But Weston stopped. A muscle in his jaw jumped, He pulled back sharply, taking the cup and turning away toward the fire. "Thank you," he said, his voice dismissive and cold. Honora stood there for a moment, humiliated by her own hope, then turned and fled to the kitchen. He was right. She was safe, but she was not wanted. The thaw arrived in earnest a week later, turning the valley floor into a muddy sludge. Weston announced that they needed to check the herd in the north pasture. He told Honora to ride with him. It was not a request. It was an order. He wanted her to learn the land. He said, they rode out under a steel-gray sky, the air crisp and smelling of wet earth. Honora rode a steady bay mare Weston had chosen for her. She was not an expert rider, but she held her seat well enough. They were joined by 2 ranch hands. One was an older man named Silas, loyal to the bone. The other was a new hire, a young, shifty-eyed man named Jensen, who had drifted in from town looking for work during the winter lull. They found the herd grazing near the creek, as Weston and Silas rode ahead to inspect a washed-out section of fence. Honora hung back, watching the calves play in the mud. Jensen rode up beside her. He was smiling, but it did not reach his eyes. "Fine day for a ride, miss," he said. "It is," Honora said, keeping her voice polite but distant. "Town folks say you're quite the rider," Jensen said, his horse edging closer to hers. "Say you ride all sorts of things out here at the Cade place." Honora stiffened. "I do not know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Jensen sneered. "Mr. Linton, he says a woman like you knows her way around a man. Says it's a shame good Christian folk have to breathe the same air as a whore." "Move away from me," Honora said, gathering her reins. "Or what?" Jensen laughed. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a long strip of rawhide. "Maybe you need a lesson. A little spook to show you your place." Before Honora could react, Jensen whipped the rawhide strip through the air. It cracked like a pistol shot right next to the ear of Honora's mare. The mare screamed and reared violently, her front hooves pawing the air. Honora lost her stirrups. She clung desperately to the pommel, her body thrown backward, sliding dangerously over the cantle. The ground rushed up at her, a chaotic blur of mud and stone. "Whoa!" she screamed, terror seizing her. Then, a black blur collided with Jensen's horse. Weston had seen. He had been watching from the fence line, his eyes never fully leaving Honora. When Jensen raised his arm, Weston had spurred his massive black stallion into a gallop. He slammed his horse into Jensen's, the impact nearly unseating the ranch hand. Weston did not stop. He reached out, grabbed Jensen by the collar of his coat, and ripped him from the saddle. Jensen hit the mud with a wet thud before he could scramble up. Weston was off his horse and on top of him. Weston's face was a mask of pure, terrifying fury. He grabbed Jensen by the throat and slammed him back into the mud. "You touch her horse again," Weston roared, his voice shaking the trees, "and I will kill you where you stand. She's just a whore," Jensen sputtered, choking. "Linton said, I do not care what Linton said." Weston pulled his Colt revolver from his hip and cocked the hammer, pressing the cold steel against Jensen's forehead. "She is under my protection. You are fired. Get off my land, now, before I forget that I am a civilized man." He released Jensen, who scrambled backward in the mud, eyes wide with terror. The man didn't even look for his horse. He just ran, stumbling and sliding, toward the tree line and the road to town. Weston stood breathing hard, his chest heaving, the gun still in his hand. Slowly, he decocked the weapon and holstered it. He turned to look at Honora. She had managed to calm the mare and slide to the ground. She was shaking, her face pale, mud spattered on her skirt. Weston walked to her. He did not run, but his strides were long and purposeful. He stopped in front of her, his eyes scanning her for trauma. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No," she breathed. I'm fine, just shaken." "He will not come back," Weston said, his voice still tight with adrenaline. "None of them will touch you." He looked at her, and for the first time, Honora saw the fear beneath his anger. He had been terrified, not for his land, not for his reputation, but for her. That night, The house was quiet again, but the silence hummed with a different energy. The violence of the afternoon had broken something open. Honora found Weston on the porch, staring out at the moonlit valley. It was cold, but he wore no coat. She stepped out beside him. "Weston," she said softly. He did not turn. "Go inside. Honora, it is cold." "Thank you," she said. "For today. For what you did." "I did what was necessary. A ranch hand cannot endanger the stock or the people." He sounded tired, trying to retreat behind his walls again. "It was more than that," she said. She stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. The moonlight turned his scar to silver. "You protected me. No one has ever done that. Not my father, not my uncle, not him. Only you." Weston looked down at her. His eyes were dark pools. "I told you, you are safe here." "I know," she whispered. She reached up. This time, she did not hesitate, and she did not ask. She placed her hands on his rough, unshaven cheeks and pulled his face down to hers. She kissed him. It was soft at first. A question. Her lips were warm against the coldness of his skin. She tasted the tobacco and the night air. Weston went rigid. For a heartbeat, she thought he would push her away. She thought he would retreat into his bitter exile. But then, a low groan vibrated in his chest. His hands came up, not to push her away, but to grip her waist. His fingers dug into the fabric of her dress, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. He kissed her back. It was not the devouring kiss of a lover, but the restrained, desperate kiss of a man starving to death who is afraid to eat too fast. His lips moved against hers with a suppressed intensity, a restrained power that made her knees weak. He broke the kiss, pulling back just enough to look her in the eye. His forehead rested against hers, his breath ragged. "Go inside," he rasped, his voice wrecked. "Go to your room, Honora, before I do something that cannot be undone." Honora looked at him, seeing the hunger and the fear warring in his face. She nodded slowly. She stepped back, her hand lingering on his chest for a second, over the place where his heart hammered against his ribs. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving him alone in the cold, the taste of her on his lips, and the walls of his fortress crumbling around him. After the kiss on the porch, Weston did not apologize, and he did not retreat. He simply began to include her. 2 days later, under a sky that looked like a sheet of bruised tin, he told her to saddle her mare. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet in the cold morning air of the stables. "I am checking the line fences up in the high country," he said, not looking at her as he tightened his own cinch. "You need to know the shape of this land. A ranch is not just a house." It was not a request. Honora was glad. A request could be debated or softened. An order was a thing she could follow, a purpose she could inhabit. She rode beside him, her back straight, her hands, now calloused and capable, holding the reins with a new confidence. The land was brutal, and it was beautiful. The winter still clung to the high hills, the wind a sharp blade that cut through her borrowed wool coat. They rode through canyons of dark, volcanic rock and climbed ridges where the snow was still waist-deep on a horse. From the top of the world. Honora looked out. The valley floor, the place she thought of as the ranch, was just a small patch in a vast, unending wilderness of peaks and stone and sky. "It is so big," she whispered, the wind stealing her words. Weston stopped his horse beside hers. He had been silent for an hour. "It is," he said, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "It is the only thing that does not lie. The land does not care if you are rich or poor. It does not care what sins you carry. It will feed you, or it will kill you. It is honest." She understood. This was his church. This was the only thing he truly trusted, this harsh, indifferent beauty. It was why he lived out here, why he hid from the whispers of men. The land was clean. As the afternoon light began to fail, the sky changed. The gray tin turned to a heavy, churning black. The wind stopped whining and began to roar. "Snow," Weston said, his voice grim. He turned his horse, his face a hard mask. A squall, and a bad one. We are too high. Can we make it back? Honora yelled over the rising wind. No, he said, his voice flat. He pointed to a cleft in the rock face, a dark gash in the hillside. We make shelter, now. The snow hit them like a solid wall of ice. It was not a gentle fall, but a horizontal, blinding assault. Within minutes. Honora could no longer see the ground. She could barely see Weston's dark shape, just feet in front of her. She trusted her horse to follow him. Her head bowed, the ice stinging her cheeks until they were numb. Weston did not stop. He pushed forward, his shoulders hunched against the gale, until he reached the rock face. Honora saw what he had been aiming for, a shallow cave, little more than an overhang, but deep enough to get them and the horses out of the wind. He dismounted, pulling the horses into the relative calm of the rocky shelter. They stamped and snorted, their coats already white with ice. Weston grabbed the bedrolls and a canvas tarp from his saddle. Get back, he ordered, his voice muffled by the storm. Get as far back as you can. Honora scrambled into the deepest part of the cave. It was not deep at all, perhaps only 10 feet from the mouth, but the wind could not reach her. Weston built a small wall with their saddles and the tarp, blocking the worst of the driving snow. Then he settled beside her. The darkness was immediate. The world was reduced to the howling of the wind outside and the smell of cold stone, wet wool, and horse. They sat on the bedrolls, their shoulders pressed together, not for comfort, but for shared warmth. For a long time, they did not speak. The sound of the blizzard was deafening, a screaming, living entity that wanted to devour them. This is not a gentle place, Honora said, her teeth chattering. I told you it was honest, Weston replied, his voice a low rumble beside her. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a solid, living presence in the cold dark. She was afraid, but it was a clean fear. It was the fear of the storm, not of the man beside her. We will be here for a while, he said, maybe until morning. We will freeze, she said, the numbness in her hands and feet beginning to ache. No, he said. He unlashed a bedroll and unwrapped a heavy wool blanket. We will not. He draped the blanket over both of them, creating a small tent of shared body heat. They sat under the wool, their bodies pressed together from shoulder to knee. The silence in their small, dark world became more profound than the noise outside. Honora could hear him breathing. She could feel the steady beat of his heart through his heavy coat. You are not afraid of this, she said, her voice small. Of the cold? No, I have been colder. He shifted, his arm pressing more firmly against hers. These are the other things. The things men do. That is what a man should fear. His hand, inches from hers on the rough wool, was trembling. Not from the cold. His whole body was a fortress of control. But that one hand betrayed him. Weston, she whispered. He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. When he spoke, his voice was raw, as if he were pulling the words from his own scarred chest. I have not been with a woman, he said, the words halting. Not like this. Not close. Honora waited, holding her breath. Not since the war. Not since before the fire. 10 years. More. He let out a shaky breath. I see what happened to my brother. I feel the fire. I am not a gentle man. Honora, I am a ruin. A man should not ask a woman to live in a ruin. His confession hung in the darkness, a fragile, broken thing. He was afraid, not of the storm, not of the cold. He was afraid of this, of her, of the simple, terrifying act of touching another human being. Honora turned her head, her cheek brushing the rough wool of his coat. She could not see his face, but she could feel the tension in him, the decade of loneliness and pain he had wrapped around himself like a shroud. I am not looking for a gentleman, she said, her voice vibrating against his shoulder. I told you, I am done with love. The man who was gentle with me, the one who read me poetry, he was the one who destroyed me. She reached out in the darkness and found his hand, not his glove, but his bare hand. which he had pulled from its covering. His fingers were cold, but his palm was warm. His hand was large, calloused, and still trembling. He was soft, she continued, her voice gaining a fierce, ragged edge. And his softness was a lie. It was a poison. When he was done with me, I was nothing. I was cold all the time. Colder than this, I was dead. She squeezed his hand. I do not want gentleness. Weston, I want to feel something again. I want to feel anything. I want to know that I am not a ghost. Weston's hand turned in hers, his fingers gripping hers with a strength that was almost painful. He turned his body, and suddenly he was facing her, a large shadow in the darkness. Honora, he breathed, his voice a warning. A plea. Do not leave me here, she whispered, using the same words she had used in the stable, but meaning something entirely different. Do not leave me cold. He did not kiss her. He simply lowered his head, his forehead pressing against hers. He was shaking. She felt the tremor run through his entire body. He was terrified. I do not know how, he whispered, his voice broken. I have forgotten. Then I will show you, she said. She lifted her face and found his lips in the dark. The kiss was not soft. It was desperate. It was the collision of two people who had been starving for so long they had forgotten the feeling of bread. It was all cold lips and chapped skin and the taste of the storm. He groaned, a low, animal sound, and his arms went around her, pulling her from her bedroll and onto his. He was holding her against his chest, as if he were trying to merge them, to pull her inside his coat, inside his skin, away from the cold. They did not remove their clothes. They could not. The cold was a predator, waiting just outside their wool and heat cocoon. But his hands, rough and shaking, found their way under her coat, his palms flat against her back, his touch a brand through the thin fabric of her dress. She whimpered as his thumb brushed her ribs, the feeling so new, so overwhelming, that it was almost pain. I do not want to hurt you, he gasped, his lips at her ear. You are not, she breathed. I am here. I am not breaking. He held her face between his hands, his calloused thumbs stroking her cheekbones as if he were trying to learn her by touch. He kissed her again, slowly this time. It was a kiss of discovery. He was relearning a language he thought he had lost. She felt him tremble, a deep, shuddering tremor that started in his chest and ran through his arms. It was not cold. It was fear. It was released. It was 10 years of solitude breaking apart. She held him, her hands clutching the front of his coat. She felt a tear, hot and fast, escape her eye and freeze on her cheek. He was trembling, and she was trembling, and the cave was a pocket of impossible, terrifying warmth. They moved together, a slow, tender, clumsy exploration in the darkness. It was not the fast, tearing passion of a saloon. It was the deliberate, desperate act of two people trying to light a fire with damp wood. It was an act of survival. He was slow, so careful with her, as if she were glass. And she urged him on, not with words, but with the pressure of her hands, the answering movement of her body. When he finally entered her, a gasp tore from both of them. It was a moment of union so profound, so long in coming, that it felt like a sacrament. They clung to each other in the frozen dark, two broken halves making a fragile whole, their bodies moving in a slow, ancient rhythm while the wind screamed its jealousy outside. They did not sleep. They lay tangled under the blankets, his arms banded around her, her head on his chest, listening to the thunder of his heart, until the first gray, watery light of dawn revealed that the snow had stopped. The ride back was silent. The world was new, draped in a thick, pristine blanket of white that muffled all sound. They were exhausted, their bodies aching from the cold and the tension. But a new, unspoken chord was strung between them. When they reached the ranch, Maisie was on the porch, her face a mask of worried relief. She took one look at their faces, Weston's grim and exhausted, Honora's pale and bruised-looking around the eyes, and her gaze sharpened. She saw the way he helped Honora down, his hand lingering on her waist for a fraction of a second too long. Maisie said nothing, but she turned and went inside. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The relationship in the house changed. Weston no longer avoided her. He did not speak of the cave. He did not apologize or explain or promise, but he was always there. When she was in the kitchen, he would come in for coffee, his presence filling the room. When she walked to the stables, he would be there, mending tack, his eyes following her. He ate his meals with his gaze on her, a watchful, protective, and profoundly possessive look. And Honora. She began to blossom. The terror that had lived in her bones for a year began to recede. She was no longer a ghost, a burden, a thing to be used and discarded. She was a woman in a man's house, a woman who had been seen in her entirety and had not been turned away. She began to ride with purpose, her skill growing. She helped Silas and the other hands move a small part of the herd. Her voice, though quiet, firm and clear. She took over the baking, and her bread, as Maisie admitted, was lighter and finer. She even laughed, a small, rusty sound, when one of the ranch dogs dropped a pine cone at her feet. She was breathing, but the valley was not a cave. The world was not the ranch. Trouble arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a wagon from town. It was not Maisie's usual supply run. The man driving it was Clay Devlin, a rancher from the neighboring spread. He was a large, ruddy-faced man with small, piggy eyes and a reputation for being a bully and a land grabber. He was, as Maisie had whispered to Honora, the man who had tried to run Weston out years ago, the man Weston suspected of starting the fire that killed his brother. He did not get down from his wagon. He sat there, a rifle resting across his lap, and yelled for Weston. Weston came out onto the porch, Honora and Maisie, watching from the kitchen window. "Cade!" Devlin yelled, his voice oily. "We have a problem. You are on my land." "Devlin," Weston said, his voice a low, cold warning. "State your business and get off it." "My business is with her," Devlin said, jerking his chin toward the house, toward the window where he knew Honora was watching. "The town's talking. Cade, they are saying you are harboring a tainted woman, a whore that Linton was smart enough to cast off." Weston's hand moved to the Colt at his hip. "That is not your concern." "It is." Devlin boomed. "Righteous and false. This is a God-fearing valley. We have laws. We have decency. You cannot just keep a harlot in your house, sullying the good name of this territory. It is illegal cohabitation, and I have spoken to Harold Linton. He is a wronged man." "Linton is a fool," Weston said. "He is a magistrate, and he is prepared to file a legal claim, to have that woman arrested for vagrancy, for lewdness, for breach of her original contract." At the window, Honora's blood turned to ice. Arrested, taken, the old words, the old shame, the old terror. She felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Send her out, Cade," Devlin sneered. "Let the law handle her, or we will." "You will do nothing," Weston said. "Get off my land, now. This is not over." Devlin spat, yanking his reins and turning his wagon in a spray of mud. "You will hear from the law. Cade, you cannot hide from decency forever." The wagon rattled away. Weston stood on the porch for a full minute, a statue of black-clad fury. Honora came out of the kitchen, her legs shaking. She gripped the doorframe. "Weston," she whispered. He turned, his face dark. "Go inside." "He will take me," she said, her voice rising, a note of hysteria creeping in. "They will take me. They will put me in jail, or they will send me back." "They will do nothing," he said, his voice hard. "You do not understand," she cried, the carefully built walls of her new life crumbling. "They can. The law, the respectable men, they can do whatever they want to women like me. They can take me and throw me away." She stumbled toward him, grabbing the front of his shirt, her knuckles white. "Do not let them take me," she begged, her face frantic. The memory of the cold train platform, of Linton's face, rising up to choke her. "Weston, I am begging you. Do not send me away. If they take me again, I will die. I swear to you, I will die." He looked down at her, at the raw, absolute terror in her eyes. He saw her, not as the woman who had blossomed, but as the desperate, half-frozen creature from the stable, the girl who had offered him everything just to survive. He saw that, in her mind, she was still there, still begging for her life. His face changed. The anger did not leave, but it hardened. It focused. He put his hands on her arms, his grip firm, steadying her. "No one," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it, "is taking you anywhere, ever. You are mine. You are of this ranch. You are here." She looked at him, her breath catching in sobs. "How? He has the law. He has Harold Linton. He has a claim," Weston said. "I will give them a better one." He left for town the next morning before dawn, without telling her where he was going. He was gone for 2 days. Honora and Maisie lived in a state of suspended terror, starting at every sound. When Weston returned, he was grim, but there was a new, hard-set line to his jaw. He said nothing about his trip. That evening, Honora found him in the stables, rubbing down his horse. The lantern light cast golden shadows, the air warm and smelling of hay and leather. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice small. He did not stop his work. "To the territorial capital, to see a judge who is not in Clay Devlin's pocket, to file a paper." "A paper?" He stopped, turning to face her. He walked toward her, and he did not stop until she was backed against the rough wood of a stall wall. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of her head, trapping her, his body shielding her from the door. "A marriage license," he said. Honora's heart stopped. "What?" "They cannot claim a vagrant," he said, his voice a low growl. "If the vagrant is a wife, they cannot arrest a harlot if the harlot is Mrs. Weston Cade." She stared at him, unable to speak. This was not a proposal. It was a strategy. It was a battle plan. It was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. "Weston," she breathed. "I am not a gentle man," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "I am not a good man. This is not a love match. It is protection. It is a brand. I am putting my name on you, Honora. So they cannot. He leaned in, his mouth hovering over hers. "I am not asking you," he whispered. "I am telling you, the preacher will be here Friday." "Yes," she whispered, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. "Yes." He kissed her. It was not a tender exploration of the cave. It was not the hesitant, broken kiss of the porch. This was a kiss of ownership. It was rough, hungry, and absolute. It was a seal on a bargain. He kissed her with the force of his will, his mouth claiming hers, his body pressing her against the wood. And she met his hunger with her own. She was not being used. She was not being saved. She was being chosen. He deepened the kiss, one hand sliding from the wall to her hair, tangling in the strands, holding her head as he plundered her mouth. "I want to belong to you," she gasped, when he finally gave her breath. "Weston, I want to be yours." "You already are," he said against her lips. "You have been since you walked out into that storm." He kissed her again, a long, slow kiss that was a promise of war. He left her in the stable, her legs weak, her heart hammering. A wife. She would be Mrs. Weston Cade. She was safe. That night, she could not sleep. She went to the kitchen for water. Maisie and Silas were there, sitting at the table, their voices low. They did not see her in the shadows. "The preacher on Friday?" Silas was saying, his voice troubled. "It is fast. It is the only way," Maisie said, wringing her hands. "Devlin and Linton, they are not waiting. I heard in town. They are riding to the magistrate in Helena. They are filing a challenge, an injunction. They say she is contracted to Linton, that any other marriage is invalid. They aim to be here before Friday." Honora's blood ran cold. The water glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Maisie and Silas jumped, their faces pale. "Honora! Child!" But Honora was already running, her heart a cold stone of terror in her chest. She was not safe at all. They were coming. Honora did not sleep. She stood by the window of her small room, The shattered glass at her feet, a perfect reflection of her own broken hope. They were coming, all of Weston's planning, the license, the promise. It was all for nothing if they arrived first. She heard Weston's heavy footsteps in the hall. Her door opened without a knock. He stood there, a black silhouette against the lamplight, his face a mask of stone. He had heard the glass shatter, and had heard Maisie's frantic whisper, "Get dressed," he said. His voice was not angry. It was terrifyingly calm, the voice of a man entering a fight. "But they are coming," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "It is too late." "It is 4 a.m, he said, turning. "The preacher is a God-fearing man, but he fears me more. He will be here by 6. Get dressed." He did not wait for a reply. He was already gone, his boots striking the floor as he went to rouse Silas and send him on the fastest horse to fetch the preacher from his bed, whether he liked it or not. Honora's hands shook so hard she could barely manage the buttons. She did not have a wedding dress. She had nothing. She put on the only other garment she owned, a simple, serviceable dress of brown wool. It was the dress she wore for chores, the dress she had mended twice. It was a shroud for her hopes, but it was all she had. She washed her face with ice-cold water from the pitcher, staring at the hollow-eyed, terrified woman in the small, cracked mirror. She looked like a refugee, not a bride, at dawn, as the first weak light of a gray morning touched the snow. The preacher arrived. He was a thin, nervous man named Elias Thorne, and he looked as if he had dressed in a hurricane. His coat was buttoned wrong, and his eyes darted from Weston to Honora, his terror of the man who had summoned him warring with his disapproval of the entire situation. They stood in the main room. The fire in the hearth was the only warmth. Maisie was there, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Silas stood by the door, his hat in his hands, acting as witness and guard. There were no flowers. There was no music. There were no guests. The wind whining in the chimney was the only sound. Honora stood beside Weston. He was a pillar of dark, contained energy. He wore his black coat, the one he wore to town, and she could feel the cold radiating from him. Preacher Thorne cleared his throat, his voice trembling. We are gathered here, in the sight of God, to join this man, Weston Cade, and this woman, Honora." He paused, his gaze flicking to her. "Honora," she supplied, her voice a dry rasp. "Honora, in holy matrimony," he stammered, then rushed on, his words tumbling over one another as he sped toward the vows, eager to be done, eager to be gone from this house of shadows. "Do you, Weston Cade, take this woman, Honora, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" The room went utterly silent. The fire crackled. A loud, sudden noise. Weston did not move. He did not look at her. He was staring over her head, at the far wall, at the shadows, at the ghosts of his past. The preacher's words hung in the air, a question that demanded an answer from a man who had sworn off all human connection. Honora's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face. He was going to say no. He had brought her this far, and he was going to turn back. He was going to leave her on the altar, just as Harold Linton had left her on the train platform. She was nothing. She was unsavable. Maisie made a small, strangled sound. Weston's head turned, his gaze, heavy and dark, dropped to hers. He did not look at her eyes, but at her mouth, as if he were remembering the kiss in the stable. His jaw worked, a muscle jumping. He hesitated for 1, 2, 3 agonizing heartbeats. Then he took a breath. "I do," he said. The words were a gravelly rasp, a sound torn from his throat. The preacher visibly sagged with relief and turned to her. "And do you, Honora?" "I do," Honora said, her voice clear and strong, cutting him off. She did not need to hear the rest. She did not care about sickness or health. She cared about the name. She cared about the shield. Then, by the authority vested in me, Preacher Thorne raced through the final prayer. I pronounce you man and wife. It was done. Weston did not kiss her. He simply put his hand on her elbow, his grip firm. "Silas, see the preacher's home. Make sure he has a hot meal and a bottle of whiskey for his trouble." The preacher looked as if he might weep with gratitude. He was gone in a flurry of nervous apologies, leaving them standing in the silent room. Man and wife. The words felt strange, like a costume that did not fit. Weston looked at Maisie. "Leave us." Maisie nodded, her eyes soft, and backed into the kitchen, pulling the door shut. They were alone. "It is done," Weston said. It was not a celebration. It was a statement of fact. "Yes," Honora said, her body shaking with the release of a tension she had held for days. "They cannot take you now," he said. "You are Mrs. Cade. You are in this house. You have my name." He said the words "my name" as if it were a fortress, a weapon, a brand, and for her, it was. She looked at him, the scarred, cold, hollow man who had just bound himself to her, not for love, but for war, and a wave of something so powerful, so overwhelming. It was almost painful, crashed over her. Gratitude, relief, a terrifying, fragile tenderness. She began to cry. It was not a gentle weeping. It was a storm. It was the shattering of a year of terror, of shame, of holding herself together with nothing but pride and fear. She crumpled, her hands covering her face as great, racking sobs tore through her. She cried for the child she had lost, for the family who had cast her out, for the humiliation on the train platform, and for the sheer, impossible relief of this one, terrible, beautiful moment of safety. Weston stood frozen for a second. He was a man of action, of violence, of horses and land. He knew nothing of this. He did not know how to fight this enemy. Awkwardly, tentatively, he reached out. He did not pat her back. He did not murmur soft words. He simply put his large, calloused hand on the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. It was the same grip he had used in the stable, a grip of possession. But now, it was comfort. He pulled her, gently but firmly, against his chest. Honora collapsed against him, burying her face in the rough wool of his coat, her tears soaking his shirt. She gripped his coat, her hands clutching him as if he were the only solid thing in a drowning sea. Weston held her. He did not move, did not speak. He just stood there, a solid, immovable object, letting her storm break against him. He held her as the sobs subsided into shudders, and the shudders into silence. He held her for a long time, until the sun was fully risen, and the room was bright with the cold, unforgiving light of their wedding day. That night was quiet. He did not come to her room, nor did she go to his. He had given her his name, a legal and binding protection. But the intimacy of the cave, the raw confession of two broken souls, seemed a distant memory, a thing that belonged to a different life. Their marriage was a contract, a fortification. And as Honora lay in her bed, listening to the silence of the house, she understood that the battle was over, but the war had just begun. The town, as Maisie reported a week later, exploded. The news that the Cade devil had actually married the mail-order bride Linton had rejected was a scandal that eclipsed all others. It was, the town gossip declared, an outrage, a monster wedding a harlot. It was a judgment on the valley. Harold Linton was furious, his pride wounded, but it was Clay Devlin who took action. A man on horseback delivered a legal summons to the ranch 2 weeks after the wedding. "What is it?" Honora asked, her stomach twisting as she watched Weston read the document, his face impassive. "It is what we expected," he said, his voice flat. He handed her the paper. It was a legal claim, filed by Clay Devlin on behalf of Harold Linton. It declared the marriage between Weston Cade and Honora invalid, null and void. It claimed she was, by prior written contract, affianced to Mr. Linton, and that she had entered into her current marriage under duress or as an act of fraud. It demanded she be returned to the custody of the town magistrate, Harold Linton, to answer for her crimes. The paper fell from her hands. He can do this?" "He can try," Weston said. He folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. He is a fool, but a dangerous one. What will we do? I will do what is necessary, Weston said. I am writing to Helena. I need to see my lawyer. He was gone for 3 days. Honora lived in a state of suspended dread, watching the horizon, terrified that Devlin or Linton would ride up with a sheriff. In Helena, Weston sat in a dusty, book-lined office. The lawyer, a small, sharp-eyed man named Phineas Cobb, read the summons and tapped his fingers on his desk. This is thin, Weston, Cobb said. A mail-order bride contract is not an ironclad legal document. It is an agreement of intent. Linton broke it. He broke it publicly. We have witnesses. Linton is not the problem, Weston said, his voice low. It is Devlin. He is using Linton's pride to get at my land. He has been for 10 years. Ah, yes, Clay Devlin. Cobb leaned back. You still believe he was the one who set the fire? I do not believe it, Weston said, his eyes cold. I know it. I just could not prove it. My brother told me before he died. He saw him, saw Devlin riding away just before the lamp exploded. Cobb sighed. A dying declaration, and no other proof. Weston, that is not enough. It is this time, Weston said. Devlin has a new ranch hand, a man named Jensen. Weston's eyes were flat. All emotion bled from them. The same man I fired for trying to spook my wife's horse. He was bragging in a saloon in Miles City. Said his new boss, Devlin, was a man who knew how to clear a field, and that he had a fire-bright future. Cobb's pen stopped moving. That is suggestive. It is enough, Weston said. File a countersuit. I am accusing Clay Devlin of harassment, of witness intimidation, and of conspiracy. And you are to subpoena Jensen. Let us see if he is so brave when he is under oath. Weston rode back to the ranch with a grim satisfaction. He had moved his pieces on the board. Now they waited. But the enemy was not just the law. Honora had taken over the small garden plot, trying to coax life from the cold spring earth. One afternoon, she went to the porch to retrieve a spade. Tucked into her gardening boot, which she had left by the door, was a piece of paper, folded and dirty. She opened it. It was not a legal document. It was a note, written in crude, blocky letters, as if a child had written it with a piece of charcoal. It said, You can't hide in Cade's bed forever. He is a monster, and you are a whore. Linton will have you. We will see you burn. She dropped the note as if it were on fire. Her blood ran cold. This was not the law. This was not Clay Devlin. This was the town. This was the hate, the whispers, the disgust. She looked around wildly. Who had left it? Silas, Maisie, one of the hands? Or had someone snuck up to the house while she was in the garden? She hid the note. She tucked it into the bodice of her dress, a small, terrifying secret against her skin. She did not tell Weston. He was fighting the legal battle, fighting Devlin. She could not, would not, add this to his burden. This was her fight, the fight against the whispers. But the fear took root. She became distant. She stopped humming in the kitchen. She stopped going to the stables alone. She sat by the window in the evening, not mending, but watching the tree line. Starting at every shadow, Weston noticed. He was a man who noticed everything. He noticed the way her hands shook when she poured his coffee. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes. He noticed she no longer met his gaze. He cornered her one night in the kitchen, after Maisie had gone to bed. She was washing the last of the dishes, her back to him. You are afraid, he said. It was not a question. I am not, she lied, her hands scrubbing a pot that was already clean. You are. You have been for 3 days, he said. You jump in the shadows. You do not sleep. What is it? Is it the summons? I told you, the lawyer is handling it. It is nothing, she said, her voice tight. I am just tired. He moved, his boots silent on the stone floor. He came up behind her, so close she could feel the heat of his body. He put his hands on the sink on either side of her, trapping her, just as he had in the stable. Do not lie to me, Honora, he whispered. his voice low and dangerous. "Not you, not to me. I know what fear smells like. What has happened?" The note in her dress felt like it was burning her skin. His proximity, his intensity, the solid wall of his chest at her back. It broke the dam of her control. A small, dry sob escaped her. "Weston, I cannot," she whispered. "You can," he commanded. "Tell me." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. She pulled the crumpled, dirty note from her bodice and pressed it into his hand. He did not need the lamplight. He held it to the window, the bright moonlight illuminating the crude letters. He read it, and his face, already hard, became a thing of chiseled granite. A terrible, cold fury entered his eyes, a fury that made her shiver. "When?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. 3 days ago," she whispered. "It was in my boot, on the porch." "And you did not tell me." I did not want to burden you. You are already—" "Burden me?" He crumpled the note in his fist. "This is not a burden. This is a threat. This is the act of a coward." "I am so afraid," she broke, the words she had been holding back spilling out. "I am so terrified. I thought the marriage would stop. I thought of your name. But it has not. They still hate me. They still see me as nothing." She looked up at him, her eyes wild with the old terror. "That is what I am, is it not? I am nothing. I am the thing that was thrown away. I am the scandal, the whore, the damaged goods. It does not matter if I am Mrs. Cade. I am still just nothing. And they will keep coming until I am gone." Weston grabbed her, his hands clamped onto her upper arms, and he shook her. Once, hard. "Stop," he commanded, his voice a low roar. "You will stop that." He stared down at her, his eyes burning into hers. "You are not nothing. Do you hear me? You are not damaged goods. You are not the girl on the train platform." He put one hand under her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You are my wife. You are the mistress of this ranch. You are the strongest thing in this goddamn valley, because you survived. You are not nothing." His voice dropped, the fury turning into a raw, possessive growl. "You are mine. You are mine now. And I protect what is mine. Let them come. Let them all come." He did not kiss her. He released her, his face set. "Tomorrow, we are going to town." The next day, he had the hands round up a dozen of his best yearlings. He and Silas drove them to the town shipping pens, which were located in the center of town, right by the general store and the saloon. Honora rode in the wagon beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. The whole town was watching. They came out of the stores, out of the saloon, to see Weston Cade, in the broad light of day, with his wife beside him. She could feel their whispers, their stares. Weston and Silas worked the cattle into a holding pen. Then, Weston lit the branding fire. The townsfolk muttered. What was he doing? Weston pulled his branding iron from the wagon. It was not his usual C-bar. It was a new iron. He heated it in the fire until it glowed cherry red. He roped the first yearling, tied it, and pressed the iron to its flank. A new brand, a large, clear A, intertwined with his C. "What is that? Cade!" someone yelled from the crowd. Weston did not look up. He moved to the next animal. "It is the new brand," he called out, his voice clear and carrying over the crowd. "My wife's brand, the AC, Honora Cade, so that everyone knows what belongs to this ranch." He branded every single animal, the smoke and the smell of seared hair filling the air. He was making a statement. She was not a secret. She was not a whore. She was the owner. The crowd was silent, stunned. Harold Linton, who had been watching from his office, slammed his door. When the last animal was branded, Weston did not put out the fire. He took the still glowing iron from the flames. He walked, not to the wagon, but to the large wooden gate that marked the entrance to his own ranch, the gate that faced the town. He looked at Honora, a long, steady look. Then he turned, and with a grunt, he pressed the glowing iron deep into the heavy wood of the gate. The wood hissed and smoked, and the AC brand was burned, black and permanent. for the entire world to see. He had branded his home with her name. The courthouse in Helena was a tinderbox of quiet hatred, smelling of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the unwashed bodies of men who had come to see a spectacle. Honora sat on a hard wooden bench, her back so straight it ached. Beside her, Weston was a block of granite, his scarred face betraying nothing, his gaze fixed on the judge. Across the room, Harold Linton sat puffed up with self-righteousness, his sister Agnes at his side, her face a mask of sour virtue. Beside them, Clay Devlin leaned back in his chair, a smug, confident smile on his lips. He was enjoying this. He was the one who had fanned the flames, who had convinced Linton that his pride was a legal matter. Phineas Cobb, Weston's lawyer, was a small, fussy man, but his eyes were sharp. "The defense calls Honora Cade." Honora stood. Every eye in the room was on her. She felt the whispers, the stares, the judgment. She was the harlot, the whore, the damaged goods. She walked to the stand, her simple brown dress seeming to suck all the light from the room. She swore the oath, her voice a dry whisper. Devlin's lawyer, a slick man from the capital, began. "Mrs. Cade, if that is, in fact, your name, is it not true that you entered into a binding contract to marry Mr. Harold Linton?" "It was an agreement of letters, sir," Honora said, her voice clearer now. She looked at the judge, a man with a long white beard and tired eyes. "An agreement you broke, to run off with a man of ill repute." "Objection," Cobb snapped. "The witness is being maligned. Sustained. Get to the point," the judge grumbled. "Is it not true," the lawyer pressed, "that you are a woman of questionable morals, that you were cast out of your home in the East for lewd behavior?" Honora's hands gripped the rail. This was it, the moment of her final humiliation. She looked at Weston. He was watching her, not the lawyer, his gaze steady, absolute. "You are not nothing." She lifted her chin. "I was a girl of 19, she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "I was seduced by a wealthy man's son who promised me marriage. When I found out I was with my child, he abandoned me, my family, fearing scandal, cast me out," Linton's sister snorted. "Told you." "And Mr. Linton," Honora continued, her voice gaining strength. "He knew of this. He received a letter from my uncle. That is why, when I arrived in your town, with nothing, after a journey of 2,000 miles, he met me on the train platform, and he did not quietly break our agreement. He shouted my sins to the entire street. He called me soiled goods and filth and left me destitute, in a town that would not even sell me a room. I was left to freeze to death." A murmur went through the room. Linton's face had turned a deep, mottled red. "That is a lie," he blustered. "It is the truth," Honora said, her gaze unblinking. "And it is not the only one." "What do you mean?" Phineas Cobb asked, standing. "After Mr. Cade took me in," Honora said, turning her eyes to Clay Devlin. "And before my marriage, Mr. Devlin himself rode out to the ranch. He came when my husband was not there. He found me in the garden." Devlin's smile faltered. He sat up. "She is lying. He told me," Honora said, her voice ringing with clarity, "that the valley was a decent place. He said that a woman like me, a tainted woman, had no right to be there. And then he made me an offer. He offered me $500, in cash. He said he would buy me a train ticket to San Francisco, or anywhere else, so long as I left the territory. He said it would be better for everyone if I just disappeared." The courtroom exploded. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order! Order!" "He tried to buy my silence," Honora cried out over the noise. "He tried to run me off, just as he has been trying to run my husband off this land for 10 years. He used Mr. Linton's pride as a weapon, to try and drive us out so he could have the water rights." "That is a damnable lie," Devlin roared, lunging to his feet. "Sit down. Mr. Devlin," the judge commanded, his voice like ice, "or I will have you in contempt." Devlin sat, his face pale with fury. He had been exposed. The judge looked at Honora for a long, silent moment. She met his gaze, her body trembling, but her spine rigid. "Thank you, Mrs. Cade," he said. "You may step down." The rest was a formality. Cobb brought up the AC brand, the public declaration of her status. He brought up the legal marriage license, filed before the summons. The judge rendered his verdict an hour later. "Mr. Linton, you may have been wronged by this woman's past, but your actions on the train platform constituted a public and final breaking of any agreement you may have had. You cast her off. You have no claim on her. This petition is dismissed." He turned his gaze to Clay Devlin. "And you, sir, I find this testimony of witness tampering deeply troubling. You are a landowner, not a vigilante. You will cease this harassment at once. I am issuing a warning. Mr. Devlin, this court will not tolerate men who use the law to settle personal vendettas. You are perilously close to a full inquiry into your own business practices." He banged the gavel. Court adjourned. Weston and Honora walked out into the cold afternoon light, Phineas Cobb at their side. "A good day's work, Weston," the lawyer said, smiling. "It is not over," Weston said. "Perhaps not," the judge said, coming up behind them. He had removed his robes. "Mr. Cade, a word." Weston turned. "I ruled on the law," the judge said, his voice low. "The law is on your side, but the town is another matter. You have won the battle, but you have made powerful enemies. You and your wife. Be watchful. A man like Devlin, when he is cornered, does not follow the law." "I'm aware," Weston said. "Good day to you, then." The judge nodded to Honora. "Mrs. Cade, you are a brave woman." "Thank you, sir," she said. The ride home was quiet. A cold, wet wind had picked up, and the sky was a heavy, churning gray that threatened an unseasonable storm. The sense of victory in the courthouse felt thin and far away out here, on the empty plains. "He was right," Honora said, pulling her shawl tighter. "It is not over." "No," Weston said, his eyes scanning the ridges. "It is not." They were in the narrow pass, the one that cut through the high rocks 10 miles from their ranch, when it happened. The world was quiet, muffled by the rising wind and the first hard pellets of sleet. The first shot was a sharp crack that echoed off the canyon walls. It was not aimed at them. It was aimed at the horses. The lead horse screamed, a terrible, high-pitched sound, and reared, plunging the wagon into chaos. "Get down," Weston roared, shoving Honora to the floor of the wagon bed. A second shot. This one thudded into the wooden side of the wagon, inches from where Honora's head had been. Weston returned fire, his Colt appearing in his hand as if by magic. He fired twice into the rocks above them. "Devlin!" he yelled, his voice a raw fury. A third shot answered. Weston grunted, a sharp, choked sound. His body, which had been shielding her, slumped. "Weston!" she screamed. He fell back onto the seat, his left hand clamped to his right shoulder. Blood, dark and thick, was already seeping through his fingers, staining his black coat. "Go!" he snarled, trying to grab the reins, but his arm would not obey. "Get the horses moving! Honora, drive! Now!" From the rocks, a voice. "This is not your land. Cade, it never was." It was not Devlin. It was Jensen. The hand he had fired. The horses were plunging, terrified, their harnesses tangled. Honora scrambled up from the wagon bed. She saw Weston, pale and bleeding, his gun slipping from his grasp. She saw the storm, the rocks, the dying light. A new, cold fury filled her. They would not take him. She grabbed the heavy wagon whip. She did not aim for the men. She aimed for the horses. She cracked it over their heads, a sound like a pistol shot. "Yeah!" she screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. "Go! Go!" The horses, spurred by the sound, by her terror, lunged forward. The wagon crashed over a rock, nearly throwing her from the seat. But she held on. Grabbing the reins with one hand, she whipped them again, and they bolted, running wild, dragging their injured companion. Another shot rang out, wide and useless. They were out of the pass, careening down the muddy track, the wagon sliding and fishtailing, but they were out. "Keep going," Weston gasped, his head lolling against the seat back. Do not stop." "I will not," she said, her voice a low, fierce promise. She held the reins, her knuckles white, her eyes narrowed against the driving sleet, which was now turning to snow. The storm hit them with full force. The world disappeared into a swirling white chaos. Honora had no idea where the road was. She only knew the general direction. She kept the horses moving, her arms aching with the strain of controlling their panic. "Weston," she said, her voice high with fear. He did not answer. "Weston, do not you die! Do not you dare die!" She was weeping now, the hot tears freezing on her face. "You cannot leave me. I will not let you. Do you hear me? Weston Cade, you are mine." She drove the wagon for what felt like a lifetime. She was numb, frozen, her body a single block of ice, but she did not stop. When the horses faltered, she whispered to them. She begged them, she cursed them. When she finally saw the dark shape of the ranch house, the yellow square of light in the window that Maisie always left, she almost collapsed. She did not remember stopping the wagon. She just remembered stumbling, falling, and screaming Maisie's name. The next 3 days were a blur of blood, hot water, and fear. Maisie and Honora, with Silas's help, had carried him inside. He was a dead weight, unconscious, his face the color of ash. They cut his coat and shirt away. The bullet had gone clean through, high on the shoulder, shattering the bone. It was a terrible, ragged wound. "He is bleeding," Honora had said, her voice a dead monotone. "We have to stop it," Maisie said, her face grim. "And stop the fever." They packed the wound with clean linen. Honora boiled the water, her hands steady. The terror of the wagon ride had been replaced by a cold, hard purpose. He would not die. She would not allow it. She did not leave his side. Mesa brought broth, but Honora was the one who forced it, spoonful by spoonful, past his cracked lips. Maisie tried to get her to sleep. Honora simply pulled the chair closer to the bed. She slept there, her head resting on the mattress, her hand on his. She would wake with a start, her heart pounding, and check his breathing, her hand on his chest. On the 3rd night, his fever broke. She was wiping his face with a cool, damp cloth when his eyes opened. They were no longer glassy and unfocused. They were clear. He was looking at her. "Honora," he rasped, his voice a dry croak. "You are awake," she whispered, relief so profound it was a physical pain. "Maisie, he is awake." I am thirsty," he said. She helped him drink, her arm under his head, her touch gentle. He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at her matted hair, at the chair pulled up to the bed. You drove the wagon," he said, "through the storm." "I did," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved me," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of awe. "I told you," she said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I would not let you die." He lifted his good hand, the left one, and touched her face. His fingers were rough, but his touch was incredibly soft. He just looked at her, his eyes saying everything his mouth could not. The last wall, the final fortress of his solitude, had crumbled. This was not survival. This was not protection. This was something else. This was love. His recovery was slow, but she was a fierce nurse. She bullied him into eating, into sleeping. She refused to let him get up, even when he chafed at the weakness. She sat by his bed, mending his torn clothes, reading to him from a book of Shakespeare she had found, her voice a low, soothing balm. One evening, he was sitting up, propped against the pillows, his arm in a sling. The new scar on his shoulder was a puckered, angry red, a companion to the burn on his chest. "You should sleep," he said, his voice stronger now. "In your own bed. You look like a ghost." "I am fine here," she said, not looking up from her sewing. "Honora, look at me." She looked up. "Go to bed," he said. You are safe. I am safe. The battle is over. Is it? She asked, her voice small. Is it ever? He was silent for a moment. No, but we will fight it. Together. A new silence settled between them. Comfortable. Domestic. It was a silence she had never dreamed she would have. Weston, she said, her hands still. When you are well, when we are safe. I want to talk about the future. He watched her, his eyes wary. What future? Our future. This house. This land. She took a breath. I want to plant an orchard. By the creek. I want to have a child. The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. She had never spoken to them aloud. Weston's face closed. He looked away, his jaw tight. Honora, I am... You are what? I am a man with a cursed bloodline, he said, his voice raw. My brother, he died. The fire. I am all that is left. I am a ruin. I told you, I am not a man who deserves... That I am not a man who should be a father. I am at the end of the line. I never thought... You never thought you deserved a family again. She finished for him, her voice soft. You never thought you deserved to be happy? He looked at her, his pain a raw, open wound. She put down her sewing and went to bed. She sat on the edge, taking his good hand in hers. I thought I was at the end of a line, too, she said. I thought I was barren, tainted, a woman who had a dead child, who could never have another. I thought I was a ghost. But I am not. And you are not. We are not cursed. Weston, we were just broken, and we are healing. She squeezed his hand. I do not want to be alone anymore, and I do not want you to be alone. I want to build something here, something that is not about survival, something that is about life. He looked at their joined hands. He looked at her face, her earnest, brave, beautiful face. He had branded his gait with her name. She had branded his heart with her courage. A child, he said, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. With me, with you, she said. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Honora, he whispered, his voice thick. The moment was broken by a yell from outside. Fire! Fire on the ridge! Weston was out of the bed in an instant, his pain forgotten, his eyes blazing with a new, cold fury. He went to the window. On the north ridge, the one closest to the house, a line of orange flame licked the sky. Devlin, he snarled. You cannot go, Honora cried, grabbing his arm. You are not strong enough. Your shoulder. I am strong enough for this, he said, pulling on his boots. He grabbed his coat, wincing as he slid his good arm into it. Silas, get the men, get the horses, get the wet blankets. He turned to her, his face a mask of iron. Stay in the house. Bar the door. Do not, under any circumstances, leave. Weston, no! He kissed her, a hard, fast, desperate kiss. I will be back, he said, and he was gone, running, his men following into the night, toward the flames. Honora stood at the window, her hands pressed to the glass, watching the fire. It was Devlin's last, desperate act. The act of a cornered, ruined man. He had lost in the courts, so he had returned to the one thing he knew, fire. She watched her husband, her ranch hands, fight the blaze. She felt helpless like a sickness. She was trapped, again. But as she stood there, a different fire began to burn in her. A cold, slow-burning rage. Weston was fighting the flames. She would fight the man. She did not wait. She did not bar the door. She went to the gun rack. She took down the rifle Weston had taught her to use. She checked the load, and she walked out into the night, not toward the fire, but toward the stables. She saddled her mare, her movements quick and precise. She rode to town. It was nearly midnight. The saloon was the only place with lights. She rode her horse right up to the front, the bat-wing doors swinging. She dismounted, the heavy rifle in her hands. She walked inside. The saloon went dead silent. The piano player's hands froze on the keys. A man in the middle of a drink held his glass in midair. Clay Devlin was at the bar, a bottle of whiskey in front of him. Laughing with two of his paid men, he was setting his alibi. He saw her in the mirror behind the bar. His laughter died. He turned, his face pale. Honora did not raise her voice. She did not scream. She stood in the doorway, the rifle held steady in her hands, its muzzle pointed at the floor, but ready. "Mr. Devlin," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor. "Mrs. Cade," he stammered, his eyes wide. I do not know what—" "My husband is fighting a fire on our land," she said, her voice low and cold. "A fire that was set. He is a man recovering from a bullet wound. A wound your man gave him." She took 2 steps into the room. The men at the tables scrambled to get out of her way. "I am here to tell you one thing," she said, her eyes locked on his. "I am not the girl from the train platform. I am not the woman you tried to buy. I am Honora Cade." She raised the rifle, just an inch, so it was level with his gut. "You have tried to ruin me," she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "You have tried to take my home. You have tried to kill my husband. You will not try again. If you or any of your men ever set foot on Cade land again, if you ever so much as speak my husband's name, I will not wait for a judge. I will not wait for the law. I will come for you, and I will shoot you myself. Do you understand me?" Devlin was sweating, his eyes darting from the rifle to her face. He nodded, unable to speak. "Good," Honora said. She did not fire. She did not wait for a reply. She lowered the rifle, turned her back on the entire saloon, and walked out into the night, her head held high. The whispers that followed her were not of a harlot. They were of a wife, a fierce, terrifying, and respected wife. The town had seen the brand. Now, they had seen the fire. The fire on the ridge had been the valley's last fever. Weston and his men, with the desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength of those defending their homes, had beaten it back. They had lost 20 acres of graze, and the North Ridge was a blackened, ugly scar against the sky. But the house stood. The barn stood. The fire, like Clay Devlin, was contained. Devlin himself was gone. After Honora's confrontation in the saloon, a story that had become the town's new and far more respectful legend, the judge had seen him. Faced with Honora's word, Weston's countersuit, and the terrified, paid-for testimony of Jensen, Clay Devlin had sold his holdings for pennies on the dollar and fled the territory. Harold Linton, humiliated and his power broken, had shuttered his office and was rumored to have moved in with his sister, a recluse in his own right. The silence that followed was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of healing, and with it, spring arrived. It came not as a gentle guest, but as a force of nature. The snow, which had buried the world for months, did not just melt, it surrendered. Torrents of water, cold and clear, rushed down the canyons, carving new paths. The creeks overflowed their banks, and the sound of running water was a constant, joyous roar. On the south-facing hills, the green returned first. It was a tentative, pale color, but it spread with a fierce, determined life. And then, as if a dam had broken, the wildflowers bloomed. They covered the meadows in carpets of blue and yellow and white, a fragile, defiant beauty that sprang from the same harsh ground that had tried to kill her. Honora had never seen such a thing. She would ride out, her mare picking her way through the mud, and just look. The land that had been her enemy, her prison, was now offering her this, a gift. One morning, she found Weston by the creek, not far from the main house, studying the land. He was not wearing his gun belt, a change she had only recently noticed. "This is good earth," he said as she came to stand beside him. He crumbled a handful of the dark, rich soil. "The water is close. What are you thinking?" she asked. "You said you wanted to plant something," he said, not looking at her. "Something that stays." That afternoon, he rode to town. He did not return with feed or salt licks. He returned with the wagon bed full of thin, stick-like saplings, their roots wrapped in damp burlap, apple, pear, and cherry. They planted them together. The work was hard. Weston, his shoulder now a map of angry red scar tissue, dug the holes, his movement still stiff, but powerful. He refused her help with the shovel. Honora, her hands no longer soft, but strong and brown, set the saplings in the earth. She packed the soil around their fragile bases, her touch gentle but firm, as if she were tucking a child into bed. They did not speak much. They worked in the shared, comfortable silence of a man and woman who know each other's rhythms. This was not a chore. It was a promise. It was an act of faith, planting these small, hopeful trees in a land that knew only hardship. They were putting down roots. They were building the future she had whispered about in a sick room. Her status in the valley had changed. She was no longer the harlot or Linton's leavings. She was unequivocally Mrs. Cade. The name was spoken with a new weight, a mixture of fear and, for the first time, respect. Her stand in the saloon had done what no court ruling could. She was not a victim. She was a defender. The first visitor came on a Tuesday. Honora saw the wagon rattling up the road, and her first instinct was to look for Weston. But the wagon was small, and the person driving it was a woman. It was Mrs. Hale, the blacksmith's wife, a woman who had once crossed the street to avoid her. She sat in her wagon, her hands twisting in her lap. "Mrs. Cade," she said, her voice small. I came to ask a favor. Come inside. Mrs. Hale," Honora said, her voice gentle. Inside the kitchen, over a cup of Maisie's strong coffee, the woman's story tumbled out. Her sister, back in Ohio, was ill. Mrs. Hale could not read, nor could she write. "I received a letter," she said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "And I fear it is bad news, and I cannot write back." Honora took the letter. She read it aloud, her voice soft. The news was not good, but it was not the worst. She then sat at her own small desk and, with the woman weeping quietly beside her, penned a reply, her hand forming the elegant, educated script of her past. When it was done, Mrs. Hale offered to pay. "No," Honora said, folding the letter. "There is no payment for this, but please, if you hear from your sister again, you must come back and tell me." The woman left, clutching the letter like a holy relic. After that, they began to come. Not often, but steadily. A young wife from a neighboring ranch, terrified, her first child on the way, had heard that Mrs. Cade had experience. Honora, whose own experience was of a silent, terrible loss, did not offer medical advice. She offered comfort. She held the girl's hand and told her that she was strong, that fear was normal, and that she would not be alone. She gave her the small, simple comforts her uncle had denied her. She became a keeper of stories, a reader of letters, a giver of quiet advice. Her past, the very thing they had tried to use to destroy her, had become her strength. She knew their pain because she had lived it. Weston watched this transformation, this quiet holding of court, with a silent, brooding pride. He was healing, too. His shoulder regained its strength, and he could once again lift the heavy saddles and work the long days. But the scar remained. One night, as they lay in the darkness of their shared room, a room that was no longer his or hers, but theirs, she traced the new, puckered line of his wound. It was different from the burn on his chest. The burn was old, a monument to a past he had endured alone. This new scar, this was theirs. "It is ugly," he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "No," she whispered, her fingers gentle on the raised skin. "It is not. It is the price. It is the proof." "Proof of what?" "That you came back to me," she said. He turned, his good arm pulling her against his body. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He held her, and in his arms, she was no longer the girl on the train platform, but the woman of the ranch, his wife, his partner. The last of the snow had long since vanished from the high peaks when they rode out to check the north pasture. The grass was thick and high, and the cattle, bearing the clear AC brand, were fat and content. They worked all day, a long, good, tiring day, checking the fence line where the fire had been. New, green shoots were already pushing up through the blackened earth. The sun began to dip, painting the vast sky in streaks of violent orange and soft, bruised purple. The air grew cool and sweet, smelling of crushed grass and clean water. "We should head back," Weston said, but he made no move to turn his horse. "In a minute," Honora said. She dismounted, her body aching in the pleasant way of hard work, and walked into a small meadow that was thick with blue wildflowers. She lay back, staring up at the endless sky. Weston watched her, and after a long moment, he dismounted too. He came and lay beside her, the tall grass hiding them, enclosing them in a small, private world. They lay in silence, the only sound the breathing of the horses and the vast, open quiet of the dusk. She turned her head to look at him. His face, in the fading light, was no longer hard. The lines of pain around his eyes and mouth had softened. He looked at peace. She reached out, her hand tracing the scar on his cheek. He closed his eyes at her touch. This was not the desperate, fearful coupling in the cave. This was not the possessive, claiming kiss in the stable. He turned to her, and his kiss was slow. It was a kiss of infinite tenderness, of complete knowledge. He had seen her at her lowest, and she had seen him at his. There were no secrets. There was no shame. They made love in the tall grass, under the wide, open sky. It was slow and wordless, and full of a peace so profound it was almost holy. It was not two survivors clinging to a wreck. It was a man and a woman, in their own home, celebrating the life they had built. A week later, the mail rider, a young man who now tipped his hat respectfully to Mrs. Cade, left a single letter. It was not from Mrs. Hale's sister. It was thick, heavy, and bore the postmark of a town in the east she had tried to forget. It was sealed with wax, bearing the crest of a lawyer. She took it to the porch, her hands trembling. Weston was in the corral, breaking a new horse. But he saw her. He saw the letter. He stopped his work, looping the reins over the fence, and just stood, watching her, giving her the space to face this ghost alone. She broke the seal. The words were cold, legal, and world-changing. Her uncle had died. He had fallen from his horse, drunk, and broken his neck. With his death, and with no other heirs, his estate, which had once been her father's, reverted to her. The house, the money, the lands. It was all hers. The scandal was a decade old, forgotten by all. She was, by the standards of the world that had cast her out, a woman of property and wealth. She read the letter twice. She could go back. She could be the mistress of a great house, with servants and carriages. She could have the respectability she had once craved. She looked up. She saw the dust from the corral. She saw her small, struggling apple trees by the creek. She saw the high, harsh peaks, and the gate. Her gate, with her brand burned into it. She looked at Weston. He had not moved. He was just watching her, his face unreadable. He was not a man who would beg. He was a man who would let her go, if it was what she wanted, and it would kill him. Honora stood up. She looked at the letter, this offer of a different life, a life she had no longer knew. She slowly, deliberately, tore the paper in two, then in four. She let the pieces, the remnants of her old life, flutter from her hand and be taken by the Montana wind. She walked to the corral. Weston met her at the fence. He said nothing. "My uncle is dead," she said. "I am sorry," he said, though his eyes showed he was not. "The estate, it is mine. They want me to come back." He nodded, his jaw tight. "It is fine land, I hear." "I am sure it is," she said. She reached through the fence, her hand covering his on the rough wood. "But my home is here. I am not going anywhere." He turned his hand over, his fingers gripping hers. his relief a tangible thing. "I know," he said. The next day, it was she who made the request. "There is a place," she said, "by the North Ridge, where the fire was. Your brother's grave." He looked at her, surprised. He never spoke of it. "Take me there," she said. He saddled the horses. They rode in silence to the low hill, where a single, unmarked stone lay under a massive pine that had survived the fire. This was where his first life had ended. They stood, hand in hand. Weston was silent, his grief a thing so old it was part of his bones. Honora looked at the simple stone. She thought of her own child, buried in a potter's field she would never see. She understood this place. She bent, and from the base of the pine, she picked a single, tough, blue wildflower. She laid it on the stone. She did not say, "I am sorry." She did not say, "It is in the past." She simply shared the space with him, her presence a balm on a wound that would never fully heal, but no longer had to be borne alone. He squeezed her hand. "Let's go home, Honora." That evening, the first chill of autumn was in the air. The long summer was ending, and the valley was preparing for the cold. A fire crackled in the hearth, the one she had banked so fearfully on her first night. Honora sat in a chair, a book open in her lap, the lamplight glowing on her hair. She was reading, her face soft in concentration. She was no longer thin, no longer haunted. Her body was full, and she moved with the slow, careful grace of a woman who carried a new life. Weston stood on the porch, watching her through the window. He was a man who had lost everything, his family, his faith, his very soul. He had built a fortress of bitterness to keep the world out, only to have this woman, this slip of a girl who had been thrown away by everyone, walk in and tear it down, stone by stone. He looked at her, his wife, his love, the mother of his child. She was reading, safe and warm, in his house. He walked inside. The floorboards creaked under his weight, but she did not startle. She looked up, her face breaking into a smile that was just for him. He did not speak. He went to her, his shadow falling over her. He bent and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his scarred cheek resting against her hair. His large, calloused hands came to rest on her stomach, a protective, possessive, and profoundly gentle embrace. She leaned her head back against his shoulder, her hand covering his. He breathed her in. She smelled of soap, and wood smoke, and home. "You are home now," he whispered, his voice thick, his lips against her temple. "You have always been." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please share them in English in the comments below. Let us know where you are listening from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories just like this one.